Welcome, LilyPod listeners and LilyTube viewers. Uh, we have a guest today that we are pretty excited about having because we minister to lots of mid singles, but our experience is with divorce. We haven't experienced being mid singles that were never married or widowed. And our guest today, Lori Carr, is a widow, and she's going to help us understand the perspective of widows in the church.
There's going to be a part one and part two of this awesome, amazing, wonderful discussion.
Part one was finding stability after loss. And today we're diving into part two, dating a widow with Lori Carr.
I have a good friend in the ward who is divorced, and we're the same age. And we were both together one day at church talking, and someone else came up and started talking to us. And the conversation with that other person was the other person was going to set my friend up with somebody. Okay. And talking about how great this person was and set them up. And then they turned to me and they said, you'll get used to being alone. Your husband was so amazing. You'll never find anybody like him, but you'll get used to being alone. So it was just such a stark difference between the two of us. There was an assumption that this woman was ready to date, wanting to date, because her husband must have been horrible. That it just must have been so horrible with her. But with you, it must have just been all roses, and you'll never find anything better because your husband was perfect. And my husband was not perfect. He was an amazing guy, but he was not perfect. And so there is kind of that difference. There's the, I really missed your husband for this great thing that he did. But telling me I'll never find anybody as good as him, that's the not helpful thing.
You shouldn't be looking, and you should just get used to being alone. Like, that's a big judgment on their part.
Yes. And I have gotten that from many people, kind of that attitude of, well, you're already married. You're already sealed to someone, and it's over for you now in your life. You just need to be happy that your husband is beyond the veil. He's there somewhere, and he's a real active part of your life, but you just don't get to see him, feel him, or hear him for the next
never mind that you might
40
live
years.
another 40 or 50 years.
Right. Right.
Like, no one else has to live your life. It's only your choice.
Yes.
I love what you wrote in your, when you kind of told us about your story, when you said that it took you a while, like over a year, to feel the stableness of your singleness. Like, sorry, actually you said feel stable in my singleness. That's how you wrote it. And I love, love, love that phrase. I've never really phrased it that way before, but feeling stable in your singleness and knowing that you're not ready to date is huge. And I think that's a little bit easier and more common. Easier is not a good word. Sorry, that's not the best word. Let me think of a better word. I think it's more common and maybe more natural for those who've lost a spouse to death to understand they're not ready to date. But there's a lot of people who get divorced that think they're ready instantly, right?
Well, because it was the other person's fault, and if they had just married someone better the first time, then they wouldn't have had all this trouble. I mean, really, I think that's a defense mechanism a lot of divorcees have, and I had it too. I'm not throwing rocks at anybody.
And some of us are pretty codependent. We don't know how to be alone, like all that kind of stuff, right? So, and I'm not saying I don't think anybody's really immune to that, but I would like to share, at least this is a very strong opinion of mine, is that every person that has experienced the loss of a companion, whether it's divorce or widowhood, or even the loss of a long-term dating partner, that you thought you had real potential with, for those who have not yet married, I think that everyone needs to find stability in their singleness, and realize that they're not ready to date until they really are, which
it's counterintuitive.
It is, because really when you are desperate for a relationship, for a replacement to like fix your problem, you're not ready to create something healthy. And when you are desperate for one, let's see, no. And then when you're like good, like when you found that stability in your
When you
singleness.
no longer need
Yeah.
a relationship, then you're ready for one.
Right.
Yes.
And is that kind of how you came to the conclusion that you were ready to date in your stability as a single person? Did you feel kind of like, you know what, I'm good now? Is that how you felt you were ready?
Yeah. So I have to be really, I want to be really clear about the process that took for me, because the night after my husband passed away, I was, in a ball on the floor, basically rocking back and forth, sobbing to Heavenly Father, saying, I need you to send me a husband right now. I can't do this. I have to get married like tomorrow. I hadn't even had a funeral for my husband yet. And that was how I felt. And looking back, I know that
Because it
was
was
for me.
overwhelming, probably, to
Yes.
become a
I was
single
looking
mom
for
with
a
4 kids.
rescuer.
Yeah.
I wanted someone to take me away from all of this pain that I was experiencing. And so obviously, looking back, I know I wasn't ready the day after my husband passed away to get married again. And it took time just to get through all of the logistical things that I had to do. We went through COVID during that time. It was an incredibly difficult time. And so where I want to be really clear is, when I say stable in my singleness, that all my ducks were not in a row a year after my husband passed away, and they are still not in a row now. So,
Oh, I so appreciate you brought that up. It doesn't mean that everything's perfect and you're
yes,
perfectly healed. It
yes,
just means that you've got your feet under you again, and you're not
yes,
falling down by those waves quite so often.
yes. And I'm not looking for a rescuer. I don't need someone to rescue me financially or take care of my teenager and really send me chocolate. I would love some chocolate, but I can handle my teenager as much as I would love some
When
help.
we go on that walk, I'll remind me to bring
Thank
chocolate.
you. Thank you. But yeah, I don't need all of the logistical rescuing that I was thinking about at the time, the emotional rescuing that I was looking for at the time. Now I'm able to look and say, I'm okay. And if I never get married again, I will be fine. In fact, I will lead a full and fulfilling life. But I can say, but I do miss having somebody to talk to run things by. I miss physical affection. I miss going on a trip with somebody and then having somebody witness my life and being able to witness their life.
Of course
And
you do. That
so,
seems totally natural. And I
yeah,
think most of
so
us feel that way.
I definitely have problems and issues that I have to work through that I haven't perfectly worked through. And I have hopes and dreams for a relationship, but I'm okay. I can handle myself by myself. And I think that's what being stable in your singleness means. And I
Yeah,
think
like
especially your relationship with your Heavenly Father.
There's a
I,
difference, I think, from the longing that you feel to have that kind of companionship again, to the desperation of you've got to send me a husband right now. And
right.
I'm
and I
so glad you shared that though, that because I think a lot of us can relate to that. That,
yeah,
when you feel that loss, you're like, wait, no, this isn't my life. I need someone
Yeah.
here.
Oh, it felt like my life was broken. And I think listening to your podcast was very helpful for me in that aspect, because I'm not sure if you've outwardly said this in your podcast often, but what I get from your podcast is my life is not broken. My life is exactly how my life is supposed to be. And
no,
and I
we've said
think
that.
initially I thought my life was broken, that something just broken. I needed someone to fix it immediately. Um, but what I've learned
It's
is,
not supposed to be this way.
yeah, and the reality is every day is exactly how it's supposed to be.
It's supposed to
And
be this way. And how do you know? Because it is.
it is.
And
And
not
you
only
can
that,
fight
but
it. Yeah, sorry.
you
Go
can
ahead.
go back to your revelation in the beginning and know that God said it would be a difficult path, and this is part of it.
Yeah, exactly.
We can always know whatever happens, however difficult it may be, that God is on the throne.
Yes.
And the only way he's getting off the throne is if we put ourselves there, and then we're kind of left to our own devices.
Mm-hmm. Yes. You've quoted C.S. Lewis from The Great Divorce in one of your podcasts, where he says, They're the people that say, "Thy will be done" or
Right.
"My will be done." That's one of my favorite quotes. That book, actually, The Great Divorce, is one of my favorite books, and that is probably my favorite quote from that book.
That's awesome.
While you're on Lewis, there's another one called A Grief Observed. Have you read it or seen
I
it?
have not.
Well, it's him coping with the death of his wife, and he didn't marry her till he was middle aged. He never married before or after, and when he married her, she had cancer, and I think he only got to be with her for 3 years or something before she died. But he made the point that you made a little bit earlier, that sometimes he would start to find himself idealizing her and
Mm-hmm.
making her perfect, making her this perfect angel. And he
Mm-hmm.
said, I really fought that impulse, because if I made her something she wasn't, then I would lose her. Like
Yeah.
his idea was, if I can remember her in the um, uh, texture of all of her imperfections and all of her ways of being that were just strange or whatever, then I could at least hold on to her memory. But
Mm-hmm.
and that speaks to me in some of the losses I've had too.
Yeah, he read it more again like 6 months ago after Henry died. And one of the things he told me that really resonated with me was, and maybe you could speak to this, that a grief observed, that when we're in active grieving, when we are mourning the loss of someone, when we're being crashed down by those waves, it's actually harder to connect with that person.
Yes.
And that when you move beyond the active grieving into living your life again, ironically, that acceptance that you almost feel disloyal having
Mm-hmm.
is what allows you to connect with them.
Mm-hmm.
Have you experienced that too?
Yeah, so I think I did go through a brief period after my husband passed away where I kind of deified him, and he was perfect to me. And then I went through that period, like I had mentioned, where I felt very angry with him all the time, and like he wasn't a good husband. And then I finally was able to get to the point where I was able to see him for all of his good and all of his bad. And as I often will pray, I'm still a little confused about how we talk to those that we love that are on the other side. But I'll often pray to Heavenly Father and just ask him if Chris can be privy to my prayers, or if he can pass along some information, and if he
Yeah, I
can
do
let
that
me
too.
know what's going on with Chris. And so during that time, as I was kind of coming to terms with Chris being a real person, with good and bad qualities, um, I was able to know that Chris is still that very same person. He hasn't changed in any of his personality traits. The difference is now he has all the information that he was missing before. So if there was a time where he lost his temper with me, or he was impatient with me, or he didn't do something for me that I expected or wanted for him to do, um, he just didn't have the information. He didn't know how to respond to me. He didn't know that I needed something, and I didn't know how to tell him. And now he has all of that information. So he hasn't changed, um, but he has the information he didn't before. And thank goodness that he doesn't have to be all perfect or all bad, that he can be both things, because that's how all of us are.
Interestingly enough, this summer, the one of the focuses of our Lily Ladies group. So it's a group coaching that I do with women who are in various situations. One of the focuses was embracing and expressing the whole truth. And in the workshop portion of our coaching session, I told a story about when I did a fearless written moral inventory of my life. And when I did that, and I wrote about the best stuff and the worst stuff. Like you said, you don't think anybody should be defined by their worst moment or by their worst act. We're a lot more complex than that. What I've discovered was not only that, but that in every one of those circumstances, I both showed up awesome and I failed, like in some capacity, right? And so it's really awesome that you're seeing like over time that you don't have to deify your husband in order to like,
Love him.
love him. And you don't have to see him as a bad husband in order to cope, but you can see
Yes.
the balanced perspective of his
Mhm.
whole truth, the whole
Mhm.
truth about him
Mhm.
as a human.
Mhm.
Like he was infuriating for these reasons, but you know what? I loved him anyway, and I wish I could hear him snore at night again.
Yes.
Whatever, you know.
I'll live without the snoring. I can
Um,
still live without that.
But you mentioned an empty bed. It's like
Yeah.
there's still a really hard part about that. And you're being also balanced in your perspective with yourself and how, like, I need to have my emotions. I need to be able to feel my feelings. And some days are going to be good, and sometimes I'm going to fall on the floor, and it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's the whole truth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
you know,
I
there's
think,
a. Oh,
oh,
sorry,
go.
I didn't know you.
No,
Keep
I
going.
was just, I keep going back to, you had asked me a while back about dating and,
Right, I
kind
wanted
of
to get
that,
to that.
that widow label. And I do think, one thing that can be quite different in dating with widows and those that have been divorced is people who are divorced, they either tend to not want to talk about their previous partner, or they want to talk badly about their previous partner. Or if they do want to say something positive, like, oh, my ex-wife and I took the kids to Disneyland this one year and it was really fun and this is what we did. Somehow they feel in a sense like they have license to do that because they're no longer married to that person. What I've noticed is it makes the men that I date very uncomfortable if I bring up my late husband in any conversations. And they'll often ask me, very quickly, when they find out that I'm a widow, if I still love him. It seems to be a big concern to them that I may still love my husband. And I will always explain to them, yes, I do, but that doesn't mean that I'm not ready to move forward. It would be like asking a person how they could have a second child, maybe. Don't
Right.
love your first child. Why would you ever have a second child? Or you already have 10 friends. Why do you need another one?
Yeah,
How
your
can you
heart
love
is big
another?
enough to handle both. And
Yes.
besides that, I take comfort in men who talked well about their formers because
Mm-hmm.
that means they're more likely to talk well about me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would think that a mature man
Mm-hmm.
who can understand that love is bigger than, it
Mm-hmm.
has to be one way, right?
Mm-hmm.
That he would appreciate your loyalty, that like you can be um honoring of your former and receive someone new into your
Mm-hmm.
life too.
Yeah.
And so while I can understand that it's a concern for them, I personally think that when you find the right person, they're going to respond to that with, I want to get to know Lori and her heart. And I really want to know. Like, I don't
Mm-hmm.
want her to pretend
Mm-hmm.
or tell me just what I want to hear, but I really want to know her.
Mm-hmm. Well, so I have a question for you. This is something that I've wanted to ask as I've been on my walks, and
Mm-hmm.
I have been able to ask you. Um, I have found I don't incessantly talk about my husband with other men, but I spent 25 years with him,
Right,
and
big
my
part of
life
your
is
life.
intertwined with his, and most of my really awesome experiences I've had in my life have been with him. Um, so I'm curious from the perspective of someone who's been divorced, how you do you separate your experience? Let's say you did have an awesome trip to Disneyland with your ex-wife or your ex-husband. How do you how do you talk with people and separate kind of the marriage part of that into just the experience part of that? I don't know if that question is even making sense to you.
Well, and
Yes.
I am wondering like your question, like what's behind your question, but if I understand what might be behind your question, um, I think early on in the dating experience, especially for those who are not ready, which I wasn't, like some of that discussion, it's emotional, right? It's
Mhm.
like I couldn't separate out all those years of experience, which for me
Mhm.
was 12
Mhm.
years of experience out from him, right? And I can't truly now and be honest, right? But it's less emotional. So I guess what I'm saying is, depending on how far along the process of healing and recovery that person is you're dating, I think that you're going to get a sense for, are they talking about this somewhat matter of factly, they're in a good place with this and they're just talking about their life, or are they still suffering and needing to like process, and are they using me as their therapist?
Yes.
Is that your question?
Yeah, kind of. I just find that when someone will say, "What's the best trip you've ever been on?" and I'll say, "Well, we went to Thailand or we went to Cuba." And I realize I'm always starting that with a we instead of an I. But then that seems strange to me, because then it seems like I just went to Thailand or I just went to Cuba. And
you could say I went to those places with my late husband.
Okay.
Because that's just a fact, right?
Yeah.
And it is something you did. But yeah, I think you're right. I think you want to be honest about who was with you. Like, it was the time in your life when you were married, and like that makes sense, right? I think if you say we, they can also make the assumption that it was with your late husband. And although I do think clarity is always good. So if you wanted to be more clear, I think it would be, I went with my late husband and our family, or it was just us, or whatever it is.
Cathy, do you remember yesterday I told you it felt like I'd had like 5 lives or 6 or something like that? And I sort of separated my life into these different phases, where I really felt like I was almost a different person in each phase of that. Of course, I think with regard to your specific question, it isn't for me so easy as to say, well, during the 9 years we lived in Washington, me and my former wife were happy until we weren't. It's not quite that easy to separate it all out. I think life's messy. And, there were things that I loved about my former wife, things I still love about her. And there were things that kind of drove me bananas about her too. And I don't necessarily feel like I have to separate that all out, to try to make it all one way. We did take trips with the kids to Disneyland, which were really fun. We did certain things together, and we had our ugly parts too. And I don't feel like I need to make it all a certain, that I need to make it all a certain way to make sense of it. And in fact, to some degree, I don't even feel like I need to make sense of it.
Well, and it's not real if it doesn't have a balanced perspective of the whole truth, right? The whole truth about a marriage is like the whole truth about a person, right? We're all full of flaws and strengths, right? And I think that at our age, and when I say our age, I mean anybody beyond the possibility of a first marriage in their 30s, if you've been divorced, if you've been widowed, in their 20s, in their 20s. Anybody beyond that point, if you're not yet married and over 30, if you've been divorced or widowed, like, life and relationships get messier and more complicated. And so we're just all in that boat together, right? And I think in that stage of life that, the people that we minister here on our YouTube channel and our podcast, I think we're all capable of understanding that we had lives before we met the new person, right? And that's something Jeff and I are very, very open about, like, maybe almost to a fault. Like, there's just because in order to connect with someone, you've got to be real with them, and that will include all your life experience. And that's another thing that my Lily ladies focused on 1 month was embrace, like, working with past, present, and future me. That, like, I'm not going to discount past me in order to create future me. I'm going to integrate all those parts of myself because that's the reality of my life, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can't separate and segregate and still be whole.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess, and this might resolve, I think, a lot. Well, it won't resolve everything for you, not all the concerns, and we haven't even really got into them yet. So I don't know how we've managed to talk this long, but it's been good. Like we've talked about so much and so many good things. But I do think a lot of it gets resolved when we all understand that we had lives before, and we want to know the person, the whole person, and that includes all their experience, and we can be okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if I can say something more about that as well, it is that we had lives before any future spouse. But I think one of the things that these guys that you're talking about may be fearful about. To maybe fear is a clumsy word there, but one of the things I think they might be fearful or nervous about is I don't want to compete with a ghost. I don't
Yes.
want to compete with someone that my wife who has to live with me every day and pick up my dirty socks and, you know, deal with in all of my imperfections, who may be putting someone that they don't live with anymore up on this big pedestal.
But the fact that you've gotten to a balanced perspective with regards to your former, I think that would reassure anyone with that fear.
I think you can reassure people, and I think you can be really open about that. And I'm saying that from, based on certain widows that I dated, who say, I realized my husband wasn't perfect. He was a good guy, but I had my frustrating times with him, and basically assured me that, no, you're not going to be living in the shadow of a ghost who never did anything wrong and who is now deified because they're gone.
Yes.
So I think that's probably part of the concern. And if you kind of understand it a little bit that way, I think it helps.
Yeah, and I think there's a part of me that would think, oh, so I do have a chance with this person. Like I'm not measuring up to an impossible standard. Like she gets it. She gets that he's human, and she gets that I'm human.
How does that land for you?
I think that's spot on. I think that they're fearful that I'm still in love with somebody and that I can't fully give my heart to them, and that I'll be comparing them always to my 46-year-old husband who didn't age past that time, and somehow I've created him to be perfect.
Right. And I don't think it's so much a thing that you can't love someone you were with before as they feel like they're going to be competing with it. And I think you can help them understand that they're not in competition with somebody else. That person is gone. That was a chapter of your life. But it isn't, if I still love him, I can't love you, or vice versa. The other thing that strikes me about this is something you've said before, but not on this program yet. I think you had some concerns about Latter-day Saint men that don't want to date a widow because of the sealing issue.
Yes.
And that's been on my mind all week in anticipation of this conversation.
So, if I can say this first, it's funny because I think outside the church, someone might look at dating a widow and thinking, well, she didn't separate from her husband because she had a lousy marriage. She separated because he died. And so she might be capable of having a good marriage, where I might be more suspicious about someone who's divorced. I mean, I would think outside the church, that might be
more appealing.
I lean toward a widow because there's no ex to deal with.
Yes.
There's no complications that way. And they didn't have a bad marriage necessarily. They just, he died. But in the church, because of the sealing issue, we're like, well, why do I want to marry a sealed woman? So maybe speak to that a little bit, and your feelings or thoughts on that problem.
So I've actually been aware of this issue for about 13 years because I have a sister who's much younger than me, and her husband passed away in an accident, and she was in her early 20s. She had a
Right.
2-year-old and was expecting a baby at the time. And she was in a much different circumstance than I am, because she was so young that when she started dating, she was still dating guys that were in college and that she had gone to high school with and hadn't been married yet. So she was still kind of in that group of first time married. But she said that she would go out with young men, and when they would find out that she was a widow, they would break it off with her right
Yeah.
away. And she would go to these widows conferences. She said at one of these widows conferences, they had someone, I can't remember exactly who it was, but it was like a temple recorder or someone like that that had come in to do a workshop, and there was an area authority that was also attending that workshop. And some women got pretty feisty in that meeting with that temple recorder, talking about how men are rejecting them because of their widowhood status, and why is this the way it is. And she said that she looked at the area authority and his eyes were just like dinner plates. Like she could tell that this is something he had never considered, never heard of, had no idea existed. And she hoped at that time that he went and spoke with the leaders of the church about it. And but so I've been aware of this. Unfortunately, she did remarry someone about 5 years after her husband passed away, a divorced man who has been very accepting of her widowhood status. And but she said that, you know, over these years, that it still causes her a lot of sorrow. When she will sit in church and someone will give a talk about the temple or sealing, that she'll feel a lot of sorrow. In fact, she feels often kind of more sorrow than her husband currently expresses about not being sealed. And she has 2 children with her previous husband, and 2 children with this current husband, and those children aren't sealed to him, and she's not sealed to him. She's sealed to her first husband. And those children, those 2 new children, are sealed to her and her first husband as well. So,
Right.
So he steps in and he's the father for all intents and purposes, because their dad isn't around,
right.
and he can't be sealed to them.
And not even sealed to his own 2 children, because the 2 children
Because they're
that
born under the
they've had,
covenant with the first husband.
yeah, so they go with her to the first husband.
That is so crazy. Like it's like, why does it have to be that complicated? Like, do you? I thought yesterday, like very strongly, that like I would love to see it be the same for men and women,
mm-hmm.
to be able to move on, marry in the temple, be sealed, and work it out later, right?
Mm-hmm.
But just be
Yes.
able to make that choice and not
Yes.
have it be a complicated factor. Is that something you would like to see?
Yes, and I mean it caused me sorrow on behalf of my sister. And then as she shared that it was an issue, I would think about other women, and then of course it became my turn to think about it for myself.
Yeah.
And I've experienced rejection. I've been on the dating app Mutual, and I have probably been rejected just when they see my widowhood status, because on that app you put whether you're divorced, never married, or widowed. So I'm sure men have swiped down on me just after seeing that status.
And that goes back to why you contacted us, that whole thoughtful labeling, that it's like, yeah, I'd love to get away from this. I don't want to remain like stuck in this label,
Right.
but
Yeah.
I can't seem to get away from it.
Right. So I've probably had that rejection and just not even known it. But
Yeah.
I've had men that have swiped up on me, and their very first thing that they have reached out to me with is, "Are you able to get married in the temple?" And I respond with, "Well, yes, I'm worthy to go to the temple, but if you're asking me if I'm willing to cancel my sealing, I don't actually know you. And so it's not something that I could discuss with you right now, but I'd love to get to know you, and we can have some discussions
And
about
by the way, I
that."
love that answer. And we do recommend, when you're dating and somebody brings up something like way inappropriate, way too early, that's a perfect response. That like, I'm totally open and willing to talk to someone I know. So let's get to know each other, and then we can talk
Yes.
more about that.
Yes. I mean, there's things you just like, your very first message that you message someone, you don't ask them about Are
Yeah,
you in
so that they
debt?
can be
Are
sealed to
you,
you.
like, do you like sex? Like, there are things that you wait to talk about. And yes, you want to know these things. They're important to know. And these conversations are important to be had. And I can understand a man's point of view where if that is just a deal breaker and he has to know that and he doesn't want to get invested in a relationship, I guess I can understand why he would want to know that right off the bat. But it's too soon and too early to be talking about that when you've never even said, hi.
Yeah.
It's nice to connect with you. Like that doesn't even happen. So
That
I've
doesn't
gone
work
the
for
gamut.
you.
Yeah, I've had that happen. And then the minute I respond, they say, well, no, thank you. Have a nice day. And then we're unmatched, like instantly unmatched. And that was the farthest that went. And then I've gone where I've texted with men for a while, then we've had phone conversations, then FaceTime, then we've gone on a date, and then we've talked about it. So I would say I've had between 6 to 10 dates where men have brought it up on the first date with me. It is
And wouldn't it be
painful.
nice if it weren't even a thing they needed to bring up, because
Yeah.
you could just be free to marry in the temple and
Yes.
honor that desire of theirs
Yes.
and even that desire of yours and work it out later.
Yes. It would be. That would be ideal. And I I wish I could get to a point with some of these men where I could actually have the conversation. I feel like for them it's a little too emotionally charged maybe, and we don't know each other well enough to be able to have the conversation. So and everything just kind of stalls at that point. But it is painful. It's painful to be rejected for something that you kind of did right. That you
Right,
stayed
you got
married, you
married in
were
the temple.
loyal, you got married and you were worthy and you still are worthy. You're just being denied that because of a policy. It's not doctrine, it's policy. And you've mentioned in your book, Elder Holland, telling men to go ahead and just marry the widow or marry the divorced woman and it will all work out. And just for your listeners and those watching, so that they understand, women actually can be sealed to more than one man. They just have to wait until they've passed away. And I don't know why that policy exists. But that it is a possibility. It's just right now the policy is that it can't happen in our
Does
lifetime.
that bring your sister and her husband comfort knowing that it's not now but it will be later and it'll be okay? Like, is that help them, like that policy? No, I mean, like you said, it can happen, just not here.
I think it does. I think ultimately they do feel comfort. I think they don't go through their daily life thinking we're not sealed, and just feeling downtrodden about that.
Right.
I think there are just times when that is almost just put in their face for one reason or another, and it can bring up those painful feelings. And I think it's something that when you're reminded of something that's painful that you have no control over, you have to take whatever control you can. So the only way to have control is through your own thoughts. And so they both have to go back to, we're going to receive all of the promises that we've been promised. And we know our Heavenly Father loves us. We don't know the meaning of all things, like Nephi said, and we know that we're going to be okay. That we know we've been told the next life is more glorious and happy than anything we could possibly imagine. And we don't know how it's going to work out, but it's going to work out.
So to all of our men listeners who have these concerns about widowed women, I think that the comfort, whether or not that policy changes, is knowing that it really will all be worked out anyway. All those promised blessings will be there anyway.
Yes.
That love that we create in our relationships here will be moved into the next life. So get to know people without judging them for like the label, quote unquote, the label that you don't want to be only a widow. You want to get known for who you are and what you offer.
And just for the benefit of our audience too, I would like to quote that passage in Intentional Courtship that Lori referred to. And it's on page 26. It says, excuse me, this principle applies even in a situation where a previously unmarried person marries a widow or widower who is sealed to someone else. Elder Jeffrey R. Holland addressed this concern of some single sisters that some of the men in the church are uneasy about dating me or considering marriage because I'm sealed to someone else. Elder Holland counseled women not to worry about these complicated sealing questions when making decisions about whom to date and marry. And then this is quoting Elder Holland. I would encourage those men and women to marry and to not worry about the sealing, because we even have a policy in the church that when everyone is deceased, when everyone is dead, the first husband, the second husband, and the wife in between, when they are all deceased, she can be sealed to the second husband also. And you say, well, who's she going to be with in eternity? I don't have the slightest idea, but God does. And then further on, this is how he counseled the sisters. You trust in God's goodness. When there are questions to which we do not know the answer, then you trust in what you do know. And what you do know is that God is good and fair and just and merciful. How he works it out, it doesn't matter. It's not your problem. God will figure it out. Look, he has to bring the flowers up every spring. He has to keep the planets in their orbit and the solar system working. If he can do that, he can take care of your family. He can take care of a father and some children. And that's a situation where a second father married in and had kids with somebody who'd already been sealed. Mm-hmm. If he can do that, he can take care of your family. He can take care of a father and some children. Trust in God and know that these sealing arrangements can all be worked out and that no one's action can block your exaltation. Don't be afraid something's going to be wrong. Don't be afraid that you're going to be tricked or fooled or disappointed. There's an answer to all these unusual arrangements with a sealing or a divorce or a death. Now, I want to add to what Elder Holland said, because I agree with all of it and I feel very strongly about it. He's saying trust in what you do know, that God is good, that he can work all this out, that nothing's going to be wrong, that you're not going to be tricked or fooled. Friends, I want to say this really strongly. If you're worried about marrying a sealed woman because you're afraid you're not going to get to be with her and there's going to be all these problems, you're trying to puzzle out things you don't understand. You're putting yourself on the throne instead of God on the throne. You're not having faith in him. And so the point here really is, marry the woman that is widowed if that's who you've grown to love and
allow that, because it might end up being the right person for you.
Right. And God's going to figure out in the end how to make that all work out. But, if you try to puzzle it out and think, the solution yourself and think, I can't marry this person because she's already sealed. And, that comes from fear and lack and a deficit of faith. And so if it's been your personal policy not to date women who are sealed and they're widowed, maybe it's time to re-examine your level of faith and just say, find the best person for yourself. Don't worry if she's sealed. God's going to figure all that out later. You've got to think about how you're going to live this life the best you can. Yeah. So that's my 2 cents on the subject.
Thank you. Let's make a billboard and put it on I-15.
We would love to. Well, and we, of course, wish you all the best in your journey. And we hope that you invite into your life with your really amazing, positive energy, someone that can meet you with their positive energy, and that you can unite with someone who understands that you have a big heart and that you have a lot of compassion and loyalty, and like you know humanity, you know that not everyone's perfect, you know that everyone has their flaws, you know that marriage isn't going to be all, you know, tiptoe through the tulips. It's going to be work, and you're willing to do that work, which is amazing. And also, you're not looking for a rescuer. You're not trying, like you said, you had that temptation, you wanted someone to come and save you, but you're past that, you're beyond that. And it's not that because you're perfect, like you said it. And we wouldn't want anyone to think they need to get to a perfect state of stability in order to date, because then no one would date, right? But just a basic sense of stability in which you are no longer desperate for a relationship. You have a good life. You could get married, you could not, and it will be fine. But you do have that desire for a companion, and we hope you find it.
Thank you. I do too. And I'm glad that you found it. It's really nice. It's nice to see that it happens.
Yeah.
I want to ask you one more thing before we wrap up. Is there anything else you wanted to say that you've learned from this journey as a widow, or anything else that was on your mind that hasn't come up yet?
So this is something that I actually talked with my sister who's widowed. I asked her, you know, if there was anything you could share on this podcast, what would you share? And this might be something for those of your listeners who are in a serious relationship or are married. It's something that she shared with me, that she shared with me many times. And I think it's really important to understand, and especially for widows and those who have been divorced, that we carry that some of that trauma with us. And you've talked about this in your podcast too. And sometimes it hits us and we don't know why, and we have to kind of suss it out and figure out why. She shared with me shortly after she married her second husband, he brought in his big, awesome stereo system with his cool remotes, and he was teaching her how to use this big, awesome system. And they were going to put the one that had been her previous husband's stereo system in the basement for the kids to use. So he was teaching her this system, and she just lost it. She started to cry. She got angry and screamed at him. And then she got in the car and she drove away, and she was just so upset. And it took her hours till she finally realized the reason why she was so upset was because somewhere in her mind, she went back to her husband passing away, having to figure out how to use this super complicated stereo system all by herself because it wasn't hers. It was her late husband's. And then this new husband was making her learn something new and different. And in her mind, it was, he's going to die and I'm going to have to figure out how to do this all over again. Right. And I think it was really important for me to understand that because, and I think other people, because even after you do find your person and you start that second life together, you're still going to have moments where a past trauma or something comes up in a very weird way because you have to learn how to do a new remote control. And you get really upset and your spouse needs to be patient and you need to figure out what happened so that you can come back together and you can say, I'm not really mad at you about the remote control. I'm scared you're going to die. Or this brought up a memory from my past relationship that was painful for me.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
We have had that. We've had clients who've gotten remarried have that. And I would be surprised if not pretty much every couple, later married couple, didn't have that. Like whether like whatever the loss is, whatever the trauma is, it's
right.
going to come up. And when it comes up, like how do you handle it together? How do you handle it individually and together, actually? Like, I mean, both. And what we've discovered is we're responsible for our own emotional well-being. And what your sister did was exactly right. Like she took a time out, she went and dealt with herself, and then she came back with some wisdom, so with some awareness. And then I'm assuming they talked it out, and that he was probably a lot more compassionate when he realized why she freaked out on him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I
he
think
did, and it's been a continuous thing throughout their marriage where he's learned that she's going to have moments that are really difficult, and she might not even understand why they're so difficult. And he just has to be patient with her until she figures it out.
And it's almost like if both people just understand, okay, she just got knocked down by a wave.
Yes. And I'm sure he has the same thing. She doesn't share those things with me because they would be his things to share. But he had a previous marriage as well. And I'm sure that he had trauma from his divorce that came into their marriage as well
And
that
those waves
they've
can
had to
knock you
work
down
through.
too.
Yes.
And on our YouTube channel, we have a video called Emotional Sunburns. And we talk about that we all have them, and that our reaction to people touching us where it's tender.
Yes.
And then reacting horribly. Like, it's a
Yes.
very human thing.
Uh-huh.
And we can have compassion with each other about that. Like you said, patience.
Yeah.
The good news is if you can name it, you can tame it. So
Yes.
if
Yeah.
you know that that's what's happening inside you, oh my gosh, my trauma is surfacing. And even if you're feeling totally afraid, I mean, there was a time, I don't know, a couple of years ago or something where um, I was changing the password to my account at the bank, and it wasn't to close Cathy out of it or anything. It was something the bank asked, and we hadn't discussed it. And she figured out that this was happening, and she's crying, and it didn't relate to anything between us. It was leftover baggage from a past relationship. And she
because
was
that kind of thing used to be very traumatic.
Yeah.
So, yeah, looked like I mean, she knew this wasn't true. She knew this was trauma. But, the horribilizing is, oh, he's freezing me out of all the money and all of that. And, and I walked up to her and I put my arms around her and I said, what are you afraid of? And, she knew that it wasn't anything she really needed to be afraid of, and that I was going to share the password with her as soon as I had changed it and all that. But it was trauma and it felt real at the time. But I think if we understand that's going to happen when we've been through other relationships and we've had traumas and we've had losses, and if we know that's what's happening, then it doesn't have to be quite so real.
And it goes back to your revelation at the beginning. When you were 22, you did have that traditional first marriage in your 20s, and you were told this would be a difficult path, and you knew what marriage took. And in knowing that, then you just realize, oh, well, this is going to be making our marriage interesting. Like, this is going to give it character.
Yeah, because I think some mid singles will go out and try to date thinking I'm going to find someone who doesn't have any triggers. Good luck.
Yes.
Because we've all got them.
Yes.
And so the question isn't really how can I find someone who has no triggers. The question is really how can I find someone who I can work together with to create safe space, and we can work together on how to deal with this so it doesn't set our house on fire.
Yes. And I love that you said that you asked Cathy, what are you afraid of? I think that's an amazing response. It could be said sarcastically, but if it's said with sincerity, then it gives her a moment to think, oh, I'm afraid. That's what I'm feeling right now. She might not have even known that she was feeling afraid. And then she's able to say, well, now why am I'm afraid? Why am I afraid? And verbalize it. And you're being compassionate to her before she even tells you what's wrong. So it lets her be vulnerable.
Yeah.
And then that strengthens your relationship.
You're right. It does. Thank you. Thank you for that. And thank your sister for that insight, because that is a really important thing for us all to keep in mind, is that we're going to have some emotional sunburns no matter what our losses or past experiences. And we can show up with compassion. We can show up with goodness, and we can also show up with self-awareness and be able to say, it's not you, it's me, and really mean it.
Yes.
And be able to work through it together as a couple, or, and then individually too. And I think when those things happen, we receive new levels of healing. And that's what's really cool, I think, about remarriage, is that we do get to move into this new phase of healing with someone, which is like a new level of the journey, right? Like, because we've got our alone journey, and that's really important and profound. And then we've got the together with someone else journey, and that's profound too. So
we like to say we made all of our big mistakes with other partners.
not on purpose.
It's funny, but there's also an element of truth in it that, you know, we didn't know what we didn't know in the beginning, like everybody when they get married in their 20s. And, you know, there is a tender mercy in being able to start over with somebody new at midlife and try to do it better with everything, the benefit of everything we've learned.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Not that we like people to get divorced, but if we find ourselves in that situation or the situation you're in with having lost a spouse to death, you know, there can be a tender mercy in having that do-over, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here, Lori. It was such an honor to get to know you better. We're so glad you reached out, and we love that you take us on your walks every day and that we've been able to be that friend, even though we hadn't met before this. And, you know, I'm really grateful also to be aware that our content can be life affirming and helpful to widows, because it's not our life experience, and I realize that we lack that experience, but to know that the principles that we teach do correspond and that it's been, you know, helpful to you, like, it means a lot to me.
Oh, well, thank you for continuing to do it. I haven't listened to all your podcasts. I came in kind of late to the party, so I'm still at the beginning. Well, I'm in the middle, but I loved it, and I want you to keep doing it as long as you can.
All right. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay,
and,
thank you.
This will be a great addition.
I think our widows in our audience are going to love it.
Good. Well, thank you for having me. It was great.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we'll just end this recording with
Anytime,
remember that
at any time is a great time for more love in your life.
Yes.
Thank
Whether
you
you're
for
single,
watching.
widowed, not yet married, divorced, whatever the time is, more love is always good.
Yep.
All right. Have a good one.
Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye.